Welcome to the couch. We have with us today Joshua, as always, and our guest Nick. How you guys doing?
Good, man. How are you?
Doing pretty good. It was a fantastic conversation we had. Unfortunately, as is the case with most philosophical conversations that go really well, many things not gotten to and things we would have liked to incorporate but just didn't get around to it logically. And that's what this is for. So let's go at it. I think both of you had quotes you had prepared, and neither of them ever surfaced. So let's get that out of the way right now. Let's build a context around what made you choose these quotes, and then kind of what you get out of the quotes after you read them.
While I was doing the research for this, I ran into a quote by George Dyson where he says, "If you build a machine that makes connections between everything, accumulates all the data in the world, and you then harness all available minds to collectively teach it where the meaningful connections and meaningful data are, while implementing deceptively simple algorithms that reinforce meaningful connections while physically moving, optimizing, and replicating the data structures accordingly. If you do all this, you will, from a highly economical position, arrive at a result, an intelligence that is not as far off as people think."
Wow, that's pretty intense. There's a lot to take apart in there, actually.
Mm-hmm.
It's a statement about the invention of consciousness, creation of a consciousness, right? Of like a super consciousness that understands the universe, the very nature of reality.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that's come up for me a lot has been the intuition that the material substrate that our brains are built with isn't necessarily central to how it is that we're able to construct our understanding of the world, or how it is that intelligence or consciousness could emerge. In other words, you could build something that was conscious out of essentially any material substrate that you wanted to, provided that you were able to understand the labyrinth of connections that were built up in the material substrate that our brain has. That isn't to say that you couldn't build something that was conscious in an alternate way. It's just that humans form a good template for figuring out how to build it in that way. But there are already many efforts to try to build simulations of neurons, and neurons in silica, as they're called, and things that are like neural nets, which are not quite neurons, but in some sense they are actively able to take information in and build categorical interpretations of what that data is, what it implies, how you can deconstruct it in many and variegated ways. And so I feel very intrigued by the downstream potential for developing something that's like consciousness, which isn't to say anything about the rate at which it will happen. I feel like I need to give a big question mark where Ray Kurzweil is stridently willing to project days like, I forgot, it was 2042 or something. But to me, I feel like I look off into that territory and don't understand the temporal landscape well enough to cognize a time frame. But I see it as something that in a very basic way is embedded within the potential of the technologies that we've developed. What do you think? Do you see this as something that's on the horizon?
Well, being a computer programmer, and kind of seeing the limits of computation, there's basically one question in my mind, which is the level of complexity that's in a neuron. So a lot of Kurzweil's projections, as I understand it, are based on exponential growth of technology, of processing power,
Mm-hmm.
combined with the amount of connections in the brain, versus with some optimization, some cleaning out the noise, because the brain's a very noisy system, and gleaning the core things, that there should be an intersection, in 20, 30 years where that becomes possible.
Mm.
If you cite someone like Daniel Dennett, who's a huge thinker on consciousness, philosopher, he says, yeah, that's a very pragmatic way to go about it. But what we're finding is there's a lot of effects that the individual neurons have, peculiarities about them that seem to have function. So that raises the bar on how much computation is required to synthesize the network.